people are joining in. Let's give 1 minute to people join in, then we can start. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining this second webinar in the series of webinars we are doing on India's energy transition. And as you know, the last session, many of you joined, and we had a discussion around distributed energy resources and its role in India's ambitious energy transition goals. And so this week we have picked up agricultural solar feeders as a way to achieve India's renewable energy transition. And we know, many of us know that Maharashtra has been one of the pioneer states, and our colleagues at Prayas has been working actively on solar agricultural feeder. And today we are going to focus the discussion around this. And I remember while studying the history of, while looking into a little bit of history of uh, renewable energy, I found that one of the first interventions around solar energy was to promote it as an alternative source of energy for agriculture in 1970s. And 5 decades down, we are sort of now seeing agriculture as a big potential area for solarization, and which is pretty interesting to me. And my rough estimation suggests if we India could achieve to replace all the electric pumps as well as diesel pumps we use for agriculture by 2030, will probably achieve one third of the 450 gigawatt RE target India has set for itself. So that's a huge potential. So given that, without much delay, we have a stellar panel to discuss this topic, and we'll start with a brief presentation by Ashwin from Prayas to discuss the Maharashtra model. Then we have Mr. Deepak Kokate, who is chief of ESL in Maharashtra, and he is responsible for implementing the scheme in the state as a developer. And we have Mr. Ankush Malik, who is from Juniper Green Energy Limited, and they have been one of the private sector provider for these installations. And then we have Akhilesh Mangal, who is head of renewable energy advisory at Gujarat Energy Research and Management Institute, to share his insights on Gujarat experience. And then we have Anne Jose, who is a fellow at Prayas Energy Group, to provide a broader perspective around the sector and the implications for power sector as a whole. So with that, I'll hand over to Ashwin for an introductory presentation, and then we'll kickstart the discussion. Ashwin, over to you.
Ashwini, I'll just share my screen. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So this is what I'll be presenting today, just giving a little background about the electricity and agriculture use in India. What are solar feeders? What's the history of solar feeders in Maharashtra? And then a more comprehensive status and update from Maharashtra. And more importantly, what are the learnings for other states? Because Maharashtra, as Ashwini said, was a pioneer, started early, but there are interesting lessons on how to streamline this process, how to accelerate this process given its social and economic benefits. And so I'll conclude with the learnings for other states. So if you look at agriculture use in India, it's around 20% of the total electricity consumption in the country, which is quite a lot, which is done by around 2.2 crore pumps and around consuming around 200 billion units of electricity every year. And all of this is concentrated in primarily in 10 states. mostly the southern and the western states, which consume over 90% of Indian agricultural electricity. This is also quite common. Tariffs are highly subsidized by the state government or even free in certain states. And the total subsidy from state governments is over 1 lakh crores and growing quite rapidly at about 10% CAGR. And this constitutes around 1/6 of the DISCOM's total cost of supply. And this makes it a very, very critical component for the sector's viability going ahead. From a consumer, from a farmer's point of view, the quality of supply to agriculture is very poor, and that is where there is a demand arising for daytime and reliable supply. We also know it's a very politically sensitive consumer category, and it's also a very important piece of the puzzle of the energy transition, which is unfolding over the years. Also, given that most of the agriculture consumers are unmetered, estimating agriculture sales has also been a very vexed issue over the decades, leading to certain anomalies within accounting in the sector. So this is sort of the context of agriculture and electricity use and why it is so important. So we thought, can renewable energy actually overcome many of these challenges while at the same time meeting many of these multiple objectives? You want electricity to be cheap, you want it to be reliable, you want it to be provided in daytime, and you also need an element of controlling it given that it's subsidized or nearly free. So one of the innovative proposals that we came up with in 2015 was that of tail-end distributed PV plants ranging from 2 to 10 megawatts, which would be dedicated to agricultural feeders, which are segregated or separated in Maharashtra, Gujarat, and many states. And those power plants will be connected to the substation itself. The advantages of this are you have low fixed and long-term tariffs. There is no need for capital subsidies. And it actually reduces the cost of supply, as we'll see ahead. Transmission losses are avoided because you're generating at the point of consumption. There are no regulatory changes needed, no different undertakings needed from farmers. There is a ease of scalability, a rapid deployment is possible, and you can count it towards solar RPO, which is increasing every year in the country. So just a schematic, we have a video on the website, but you can see the incoming transmission line, and here you have the separate feeder. So you have one feeder supplying agriculture to the households and another feeder supplying electricity to the farm. So when these feeders are separated and you input a small dedicated solar power plant which is connected at the substation, it can directly provide electricity for 8 hours to agriculture. So this is the innovation we came up with, and this was accepted in Maharashtra. A dedicated solar feeder policy was instituted in the state in 2017, after which a lot of tendering and all those kinds of things happened, which I'll come to. But more importantly, MNRE and the central government recognized the benefits and included a very similar framework in Kusum A and more recently even in Kusum C. So A is the dedicated 2 to 10 megawatt power plants, and C was earlier for only for grid-tied solar pumps, but that has been amended recently to allow for feeder level solarization as well. So now we will come to, this is another schematic of the solar feeder I have included because people can see the slides later on. But coming to the developments in Maharashtra, where has Maharashtra gone in the last 3 years when the policy was instituted in 2017 and after tendering has happened, where are we right now? So if you look at this first graph, the green represents Mahagenco, which is the generation company, and the yellow is for Maha Discom, which is the distribution company. We both are implementing projects. And so combined, they have requisitioned or tendered for close to 3,500 megawatts, out of which just over 3,000 megawatts they have filed for approval, and the regulator has already approved 1,800 odd megawatts. So this is a capacity, 1,800 megawatts, which has already been approved by the regulator. There is a share of 2/3 which goes towards MSCDCL and 1/3 which is being done by Mahagenco. Coming to the price discovery, we had in the earlier, the first few tenders, we had excellent price discovery of close to 3 rupees, 3.1. But if you look at all the 1800 megawatts, the weighted average price of the entire 1800 megawatts is very attractive at 3.11. When you compare to the average power purchase cost in Maharashtra, which is around 4 rupees. If you look at the geographical spread of these projects, they are well spread out over the state across all circles, except for Konkan, where agriculture pumping demand is very, very low or quite negligible. But apart from that, you will see a very good spread across the state. So this is how things are shaping up in Maharashtra. And what is the impact of the scheme? So what does it deliver? So, assuming the 1800 megawatts which are approved, assuming we have all pump sizes of 5 HP who are using around 1500 hours every year, assuming that the solar plants give an output of 19% utilization, the price of 3.11 and the average power purchase cost of 4 rupees. So if you make these assumptions, what is the impact? So you can see that around 5 lakh pumps or 12% of the total pumps in Maharashtra will be solarized in the coming 1 to 2 years from this 1800 projects. And if you look at the target for Maharashtra, it's around 5 gigawatts, so 5000 megawatts, then that will cover close to 1/3 of all pumps in Maharashtra by 2025. So that's quite a impressive target and achievements. We already have over 300 megawatts which are already commissioned within the state of the 1825. If you look at contribution to solar RPO, this 1800 megawatts will generate over 3000 million units and will contribute to 1/3 of the solar RPO and over 2% of the total generation within the state. And if you notice that the solar RPO is increasing to 13.5 in 24-25, which is one of the highest in the country. And more importantly, from the distribution sector point of view, this will save close to 300 crores per year. Even if you don't consider any escalation in the average power purchase cost, which goes up typically around 5% every year, still you will be saving 300 crores a year. So this is very significant savings, even without considering the transmission charges or the losses. And what essentially we feel is this will lower MSEDCL's average cost of supply, reduce the need for subsidies. And this is one important pillar in improving the sector's financial health. So now coming on to the regulatory processes in Maharashtra, what are the learning for other states? We've had 22 orders so far, which provide good clarity and learning for other states. So one pretty standard stuff is, any changes in the bidding documents. Maharashtra has lowered the size to 2 megawatts instead of 5 megawatts. There are some clarifications provided in the revised RFQ and PPAs in terms of offtake compensation, in terms of bank guarantees. There are now standardized formula for change in law, which are akin to the formula proposed in the wind solar hybrid guidelines. So these are changes in the bidding documents. Then you have routine regulatory approvals which are needed, supplying, fixing the hours for agriculture, tariff adoption, counting of this generation towards solar RPO. So all these are standard regulatory processes that need to be followed, which have been done in Maharashtra. More importantly, from a tariff discovery and competitiveness point of view, one of the first few tariff adoption orders, we had a tariff discovery of 3.09 to 315. But later on, given that a lot of changes are happening in the solar sector, some customs duties have been put in place, and some of the risks that are moving over time, the tariff discovered was slightly higher, and the regulator actually did not adopt these tariffs. And they were the procurer were asked to renegotiate with the bidders, in spite of actually the regulator themselves noting that the competitive bidding process was transparently carried out. So this is a important issue for other states to also consider what is considered a competitive and what is good value for tariff discovery. Further on, the next year, Maharashtra MSEDCL then raised the ceiling tariff to 3.3 rupees to get more people interested in these projects. And in one special case, the Mahagenco actually requested ESL to do one project because there was a long delay in spite of bidding several times. And ESL agreed to do it at a competitive tariff. Though while approving this, the regulator said that, you know, you should only do it through competitive bidding and not treat this as a precedent. The other things that MSCDCL is doing to improve implementation and accelerate the process is they are now moving to what is called as a continuous bidding. So each month they would want to put out tenders. So whatever, suppose they put out 1,000 megawatt tender and only get 800 megawatts or so in the first round, then they'll put 200 megawatts again in the next month. So they will keep doing this continuous process until the target is achieved, so as to accelerate the process. And they have also started facilitating the process by creating a land bank. So they are approaching all gram panchayats in the state and asking them to facilitate land. In a recent news item, we saw that around 4,000 acres of land, which will support just less than 1,000 megawatts, has been already offered by Gram Panchayat, and the lease rate is 30,000 rupees an acre per year as per the Maharashtra policy. And we also know certain other states like MP and Haryana are doing this. But in case MSCDCL actually provides the land to the developer, then obviously the ceiling tariff would be reduced in that case. MSCDCL has also started publishing substation-wise spare solar evacuation capacity. This is important so that developers can try and seek land where, depending on which substation has what load and how much spare capacity. So of the 2,700 substations in 31 circles, we already have 25,000 odd megawatts as spare capacity, which is published by MSCDCL. And this is much more than the 15,000 megawatts needed for universal coverage of agriculture under solar feeders in Maharashtra. So this is certainly not a limitation or a deterrent in terms of doing this. And just a few days ago, MSCDCL has put out a new tender for 1,300 megawatts in 29 districts. And over the next month, we'll see what kind of response this tender gets. Just going to the last few slides now, what are the lessons for other states? This is the capacity on the green bars, which has been approved by MNRE for states. So a total of 4,800 odd megawatts has been approved for various states under Kusum A, just Kusum A, and these can support around 17 lakh 5 HP pumps. And under Kusum C, under the feeder level solarization, another 1.67 lakh pumps have been sanctioned by MNRE. So that's around 470 megawatts. So a total of 5,000 megawatts has been sanctioned by MNRE, and just under 20 lakh pumps will be energized through solar feeders. So that is an incredible number, and we are very excited to see this progress across states. The other thing that the graph shows is the blue line is the tariff that has been set as a ceiling tariff by various state regulators. And you look at the yellow line, that is their average power purchase cost. So you see there's a significant difference, the gap. This is essentially the economic saving for the distribution company, not counting that the yellow line will move up with every year as APPC escalates. And this is not even counting transmission losses. So there will be very significant economic gain for states and distribution companies to be made. So quickly, what are the important learning for states so that they can accelerate deployment, they can avoid regulatory hurdles and facilitate the solar transition in agriculture? One is setting an appropriate benchmark tariff, because we've seen in Maharashtra, in the first phase, there was an emphasis on very low solar tariffs, which resulted in slightly low participation in certain tenders. Subsequently, this was improved, and now the tariff ceiling has been increased. And even while comparing it with large megawatt scale projects, it's important that the comparison is done in a fair manner, where transmission losses, the distributed nature of the projects, and the advantage in terms of jobs and distributed scale of projects is also accounted for. So setting a good benchmark and appropriate tariff for that states is important. Other critical steps that states and distribution companies can take is doing critical preparatory work in terms of establishing land banks, publishing substation-wise capacity, and creating farmer awareness campaigns, which are also very important. Contractual clarity needs to be adequately provided, especially in cases like change of law or offtake compensation or a transmission interconnectivity, where we have seen some cases in Maharashtra where it was not clear at what voltage the projects needed to be connected and whose responsibility it was to lay that final line. Another important thing is states have different pumping needs depending on the type of crop, depending on the rainfall, depending on the pump size, and many other factors. So instead of limiting it to a certain narrow range of projects, we feel that the states need to adapt the project size as per their state's requirement and even go beyond 2 megawatts. Uh, and in fact, MNRE has a state guidelines which encourage them to do so as well. And we also feel that SERCs and state governments need to actively engage in this process and be very nimble and agile in terms of policy and regulatory amendments and directions needed, depending on how the progress is in states. So just as a concluding remark, we feel that the Maharashtra-led initiative of solar feeders has been aptly recognized for its financial and social benefits and has been included in Kusum, and it's been rolled out nationally. So that is very, very beneficial. And we see this as a win-win-win states for the farmers, for the state government, and as well as the distribution companies. We see that MNRE has adopted the similar approach in the decentralized solar plant guidelines, and they are in fact nudging states not to limit themselves to the Kusum phase 1 target. So the Kusum phase 1 targets are around 30 gigawatts, 30,000 megawatts, but the state MNRE is saying that the states need to go even beyond that. So we feel that, given the economic gains, states should plan for universal coverage with yearly targets and use this as a very, very important opportunity, not only to improve quality of supply and gain the farmers' trust, but simultaneously improve the DISCOM's viability without burdening the taxpayer. So we feel this can be very, very transformative for agriculture and electricity in the country. And this can go a long way, as Ashwini suggested, in contributing to the 450 gigawatt target, which is also very important for various co-benefits within the country. So I will stop at that and happy to take any questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwin. So we actually have got a few questions for you, but we'll take up that later. I'll first go to the panelists and request a reaction from the panelists, initial reaction. So I'll start with Mr. Kokate. Look forward to your initial remarks.
Yes, thank you, Ashwin. Thanks for a nice presentation and analysis. So Ashwin, if you see that Maharashtra has already been lead, and as you said that out of 1800 megawatts, we're happy to share that ESL has an firm PPA of 800 megawatt about. After that 800 megawatt is we already been in hand. So for that matter, we started ESL, as you know, that we started with lighting business and then slowly coming into solar. But now we have a dedicated company called as a Convergence CESL, that is Convergence Energy Services Limited. And this is a purely dedicated company to take for this distributed solar business and the convergence business. So unlike Maharashtra, we also started Goa operations with 100 megawatt. Similarly, out of that 1 megawatt already been commissioned. So coming to your presentation, I see that this overall DISCOM, the performance of the DISCOM, and if you see the average cost of realization, revenue realization for the agriculture, that itself is a very challenging task for agriculture, especially for the Maharashtra DISCOM, where 30% of the demand goes to agriculture and very large number of consumers, 40 lakh consumers connected. As you said, there's a big political customer category. So the revenue realization, if you see that it is definitely is less than 20%, and address to that is a very important task. We are into this sector, and yes, you know that this Shantanu, you also know that we have been trying and see this sector since last 10 years for the agriculture. So going for the DSM in agriculture, DSM, and then slowly moving to the distributed solar and putting the small solar plants near into the close vicinity of the substations, and catering the bunch of agriculture DTC, that is distribution transformer, already been separated from the sectors. So this has created a really a good scenario in Maharashtra, and I'm very frank to share you that it has started right from the demand from the farmers that they need a daytime power. It's not only a daytime power, but it should also a reliable power. So what I can tell you, out of installing now 150 megawatt and about 125 sites has been successfully commissioned. Of course, whole lot of challenges is there. Separate list is there. I will not discuss that list. But the important aspect what we get at the end of the day, when we commissioned and celebrated the 100 megawatt by commissioning 99 sites, 110 sites, we experienced that there was a really a good response from the farmer side, because farmers are now getting the good voltages at the voltage end. That is what one of the important feedback we got from the farmers. Naturally, because the generation is at the 11 kV level and we are pushing that. The second important part is that it's not only reduction only on the transmission losses, it is also on the distribution side, because we are injecting the power and connecting at the 11 kV busbar level, not at the 33 kV. So the journey from 110 kV to 33 kV, that has also been need to be accounted for, and that also benefited by the DISCOM. So you know that the 33 kV losses may be around 8 to 9%. So that is also beneficial to the DISCOM. And obviously the reduction in the subsidy, this is a progressive reduction in the subsidies and biggest benefit the state government has got. So I believe on the 2nd October on the last year on the Gandhi Jayanti, state government has dedicated few agriculture feeders exclusively running on the solar. So that need to be really studied through, because not much time has been passed. The plants already been commissioned and plants need 3-4 months time to settle, because it's really at the 11 kV layer. So a whole lot of challenges from the distribution side, busbar challenges, shutdowns and shutdowns of the plants are there. But at the outset, I say that this is a very good scheme. This is a very, very welcome scheme at least in the state of Maharashtra. And what we see is a very encouraging result. That's the result. We are getting few projects on nomination basis especially from Mahajanko and MSDCL. So let us hope that what can be done. And the challenge what I see, and is already been elaborated, the price, the floor price, what you see that it has to be increased, especially in last 1 year, the rise in material cost. You see that the iron cost and copper cost and other equipment costs, and the duties and levies, special duties and levies by the government, this will really impact the cost. So that has to be really revisited at the regulatory angle, because 3 rupees definitely not what it has to be adjusted somewhere. And if you are looking at the big picture, 5,000 megawatt in the coming year in the Maharashtra, this has to be reviewed from the regulatory angle. So Ashwin, as opening remarks, that's it from my side.
Thank you, Mr. Kokate. So I request all the participants to put their question in Q&A section. I'll take up what has been put into the chat so that everybody can see it, and some questions can be answered live. So thank you. Now I move to Mr. Ankush Malik. So maybe you can share your remarks. And
yeah, thanks Ashwin for the presentation. Right. So so we have been pretty active in Maharashtra, right? So we actually have commissioned 100 megawatts, which was basically the first set of 10 megawatt projects which were bid out, and we constructed and commissioned them in March of last year. So in terms of the overall scheme, right, as the benefits, as told by Ashwin, there are enormous benefits in terms of its decentralized power, the rates at which it is being done. If you take the benefits of transmission losses, the transmission losses and charges that are getting saved, apart from the fact that what daytime power can be provided to farmers, it's a win-win for all. So in that sense, it's a big win-win. But in terms of challenges that we have looked at, I think the one major issue is in terms of size, right? So I think why we were able looked at Maharashtra was that there is a size up to 10 megawatts, right? So what we have looked at in other states, so we wanted to replicate this in other states, but sadly in other states, I think the limit So Gujarat recently came out with a tender where the maximum allowed capacity is 4 megawatts. And then under Kusum right now it's 0.5 to 2 megawatts, right? So for an IPP, it becomes very, very difficult as the size reduces in terms of the cost increase, the overheads increase. So as Ashwin had recommended at the end, it should be left to the DISCOM or to the local body to understand how much load it can take. 10 megawatt is a size which we were pretty comfortable with, but as we go down lower, we will have to accept that the cost will increase. So cost at the capex side as well as majorly on the opex, right, will increase, which will increase the tariff. Apart from that, there is only, as Mr. Deepak told, in terms of a future challenge, what we look at is increasing cost. So government has now levied a 46%, so 40% basic customs duty, right? So that is almost, it will be after GST and other surcharges will be around 46%. Now that will have an impact of around 50 paisa on the tariff, right? So whatever was, say, bid at 3 rupees or 3.30, even if some module prices have gone down, this will have a very significant impact. And that primarily could be a roadblock in the immediate future in installation of these plants, right? And that is a problem which the entire industry would be facing, right? Because there will be an increase in tariffs. DISCOMs don't take it well. Once they have seen rates going down, it becomes a problem for them to accept higher tariffs, right? So yeah, so that is primarily my feedback on the presentation. Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Malik. Now I go to Achilles. Maybe you can also share a bit about Gujarat experience as well. Achilles.
Sure. Ashwin, do you want me to talk about Gujarat right now, or do you want me to just
right now let's talk about opinion on the presentation on Maharashtra model, and then we'll get into Gujarat eventually.
Right. So I think great presentation firstly by Ashwin. The data is very, very promising. And I think it serves as a template for other states in the country, undoubtedly. In terms of the concept itself, we've been discussing this for the last, I think, 5 years. There are two views on, do we do feeder level solar or do we do pump level, so grid connected solar, what Gujarat has done. And I think both models, there are pros and cons of both models. And I think rightfully MNRE has a provision for both these options under component A and component C. So I think in terms of policy, we have the necessary policy and fiscal support in terms of capital subsidy, especially for component B and C. So this is really fantastic, and I think it's in place. A couple of, I think, in terms of concerns also is component B is very, very critical. And I say this even for a highly electrified state like Gujarat, because we have a significant number of pending agricultural connections. So it's very interesting to see how states will treat this. Will they push these? So of course, you have component B, but then will you eventually integrate this into the larger agricultural feeder, or do states, do we want to keep them isolated and off grid? That's an interesting, I think, point we can all discuss on this forum. That's just one thing I wanted to throw in there. The other, I think, very important thing is the presence of feeder level separation. I think Gujarat is is very ahead in terms of this. So is Maharashtra, but other states are not. And so they will face significant other challenges in doing both component A and component C to provide daytime power. So another point which I think we could certainly discuss. Finally, what I would really like to say is these are all, so especially component A, we are doing supply side interventions. We are bringing down the power price at the input side of the DISCOM. Now that's happening even on a larger scale through solar, larger solar tenders and so on, not necessarily distributed. And I don't mean to devalue this. This is very important. So, but what can we do on the consumer tariffs? I think that's an important discussion that we must have. We cannot, as we all know, we cannot have tariffs at this rate. I mean, no tariffs or HP-based tariffs. These are placing significant stresses on the entire state government's budget, as well as DISCOM's fiscal deficits. So how do we really look at it from a much more holistic perspective is, I think, very important. In that sense, I think component C can be important because they would reduce that number of electrons, that number of kilowatt hours that we procure from the DISCOM. So I think these three points I'd like to lay out and perhaps go into a little more detail as the discussion progresses. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Achilles. Now, Anne.
I'd just like to provide a little more context for the solar feeder approach itself. I think, for any transition related effort, the financial viability of the distribution utility is at the cornerstone. I mean, it's a prerequisite for any technological and structural change that we want to see in the sector. And with 4.5 lakh crores of accumulated losses, many distribution companies are quite far from that. So I guess the problem, the way to summarize the DISCOM challenge could be the fact that DISCOMs currently have relatively high costs, which are growing. In fact, on an average, it's about 7 rupees per unit in India, growing at 6% per annum. And increase in tariff or revenue collection from other sources is unable to keep pace with the increase in costs. So therefore, measures to reduce the costs of supply of the utility are of paramount importance, and especially for agricultural consumers. Now, Ashwin in his presentation mentioned that about 1/5 of the sale to consumers in India is to agricultural consumers. But we must also note that in many states, it's actually much more. Like in Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Karnataka, Telangana, it's about 40% of the sales is to agricultural consumers. And a lot of this is subsidized, and the share of subsidies will only grow in the future, especially with migration of consumers who are able to get competitive supply options through open access and captive routes would result in a significant reduction in the cross subsidy amount that is being received. In fact, many regulatory commissions are also changing their tariff design to the extent that the contribution of cross subsidy to meeting the cost has actually come down. On an average in India, it's only about 5% of the costs are actually being recovered from cross subsidy, and that quantum and that share is declining. So therefore, a lot of the pressure is going to fall back on subsidies, especially to meet the agricultural demand, where consumers are paying very nominal rates for the power supply and will never be able to pay in the medium term or in the future at cost of supply, which is about 7 rupees per unit or so. And with other competing pressures on state finances, uncertainty in tax-based growth, uncertainty in the buoyancy of a lot of the tax incidences that are there, issues with devolution of funds, the subsidy payments itself, and whether the states can meet their commitments itself is a question. So therefore, reduction of cost of supply is of paramount importance. And one of the major contributors to the buildup of losses of utilities, which necessitated, bailouts like Uday, was the fact that there were delay in subsidy payments even in the past. And solar feeder kind of approach, by reducing the cost of supply itself, reduces the subsidy requirement and therefore also contributes to reduction of the working capital requirement and the pressures that are there before the utility because of issues with power procurement or with subsidy delays, and it increases the competitiveness of the utility as such. So this sort of role that it plays in the larger transition story is also extremely important. Another sort of reason why this sort of approach or these sort of innovative approaches should be given more space and much more investment should take place is also, with the kind of efforts that have happened in the past with village electrification and household electrification and the amount of investment that has happened in the grid, the focus has rightly shifted towards better supply and service quality. And the focus is more also going to be not just on households, but also on enterprises and agriculture. And reliable power supply will be demanded, especially when states are also talking about surplus power and moving towards that state. So a scheme like this, complemented with ongoing feeder segregation efforts under major schemes, will ensure that at least daytime 8 hours power supply is provided to farmers. And feeder separation will also move towards a better quality supply to farms and to households and enterprises. And these sort of transfer of benefits to farmers, which will be there, will really try and address some of the trust deficit that has been building with farmers over the years because of poor quality supply. So it's not just about discount finances. The fact that farmer quality of supply is also increasing is a great benefit from a solar feeder kind of approach from the larger perspective. And I think without innovative efforts like this, the whole transition story might get derailed or maybe even delayed going forward, which is why accelerated push for efforts like this and complementary approaches are very, very necessary. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. This is very insightful inputs. So we have got a bunch of questions from participants, and I'm going to pick up some. Some Ashwin has answered through the chat box, but I'll pick them up for in the interest of wider audience. So the first set of questions are around one question is around this is an interesting forward-looking policy, but how do we back this up with reliable and efficient infrastructure? And in past, we have had great schemes, for example, energy efficient pump sets and even HPDS systems. So they were announced with big fanfare, but they were not followed up in ground level. How do we address that? And one question is about what's the current status of achievements in on solar feeder? How many solar feeder are in operation right now, and what has been the experience with that? And Ashwin, you presented an interesting set of impacts. What are the benefits out of this scheme? So how is that calculated? What is the information base for that? Are these assumptions or these are based on some real numbers? So I'm just trying to read some questions. So the other question is so other question is actually about MSPGCL asking ESL to carry this implementation through competitive bidding. It would be interesting to know what is the financial recovery for ESL on LED projects. I mean, it's a different project though. Yeah, maybe we can address this set of questions first, and then I'll put together another round of questions. Ashwin, over to you.
Yeah, so in terms of what I mentioned as assumptions, those were just, as in that word may have been confusing, those are all actual approved data from the regulator. So 4 rupees is the average power purchase cost, which is the actual cost. 3.11 is the actual discovered solar cost from projects. 1826 is the actual approved MERC megawatts. The only assumption is 19% CUF, which is a minimum requirement as per the PPA. And so if you just do the maths and assume assume is based on, obviously you have a pump size ranging from 3 HP, 5 HP, 7.5 HP, but in Maharashtra, the average pump size is 5 HP. So if you take that and the annual hours of use, then you will get those numbers of 14 lakhs or 30 lakh farmers getting those benefits in the next, as in when the projects are commissioned. Around 350 megawatts are already commissioned, around 1 gigawatts is under some form of construction and commissioning. So once these 1800 megawatts are commissioned, the farmers, and as Mr. Kokati also mentioned, daytime reliable supply is a need and demand from the agriculture community. So as you move towards 5,000 megawatts, the benefits will be obvious for the farmers and distribution companies.
Just to add, Ashwin, into your assumption thing, the regulator, they have the derived number. This has a one scientific method to calculate. There are two kinds of tariff imposition into Maharashtra. One is meter tariff to the agriculture and whole lot of other set consumers on the HP tariff. where the HP tariff is determined on that the data which you presented, the hours of operation per year and average size of the HP. That's how it is calculated. So it's not only assumption, it is an realistic data collected and then it has been calculated scientifically.
Thanks. Ashwin, do you have any response to the infrastructure need for this infrastructure backbone required to operationalize the scale of solar feeders in a state?
Nothing specifically. The sort of core requirement is feeder separation, which is mostly done in Maharashtra's by and large. There may be a few pockets where it may not have been done as yet, but by and large, it's already done. There is a national mandate to do it as per Uday, as well as the new proposed DISCOM package. So, and in fact, the new DISCOM package, which is still in draft stage, has a provision to accelerate or give a preference to feeder segregation where solar feeders will be installed. So this is not just a thing in Maharashtra, but the Ministry of Power is actively pushing this in all states, given the obvious benefits. So feeder separation is certainly an infrastructure requirement, and obviously, there needs to be spare capacity to interconnect these projects with the substation and land around that substation. But that is not a thing that you can't overcome with good community management. Maybe Ankush could.
Yeah. So I think I think one specific requirement, right? So as in just going back when we were bidding, right? So one question mark that everyone has is on grid availability, right? So the infrastructure at a distribution level is not as good as at the transmission level, right? So that was a very, very big question mark for us while we were bidding. And for that, in terms of upkeep of the infrastructure, how well it is constructed, that becomes a big question mark, which frankly right now is not up to the mark, right? So improvements have taken place. We were pleasantly surprised that in Maharashtra, it was not as bad as people expected. We are at around 96 to 96.5% grid availability. In utility projects, generally we're looking above 99. In terms of, I can just give you an example. So when we were going for the financing of these projects, as in the private lenders were just not comfortable in terms of the concept. So their understanding was that the grid availability won't be above 90%, right? And a very, very big question mark was on this part. So because there have been smaller projects earlier, I think in different other states, where grid availabilities have been very, very low, right? So that Maharashtra has been trying to improve that. I think one specific clause that has come into the recent tenders is they will be giving compensation of 75% of the tariff if the availability is above 98%. Now that brings around a big comfort to the generator, in the sense that even if, given that the DISCOM will have to pay that, right? So they will try to make the infrastructure better rather than leaving it, right? So that is a big comfort that has come in Maharashtra, and probably then needs to be looked at by other agencies as well.
Thanks, Ankush. So now I pick up a second set of questions. Have you analyzed the impact of water table and crop yields resulting from peak isolation pumping? Because solar powered pumping will happen as the sun rises and the solar system starts producing. Have you looked at that aspect? Related question is, what can we do going forward to ensure both energy use and water use efficiency in agriculture? And then a third question which came up was, in this model, what is the incentive for farmers? Why would they participate, and why would they cooperate in such a system?
Can I take up the last one, Ashwini?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in terms of the farmers, I think it's daytime reliable power is a big attraction. in the first step, there are no change in tariffs. There's no extra regulatory hurdles, no undertakings, no change for them to start off with. I think for the sector and for the ground realities that we have in India, it is pertinent that the state or the DISCOM take the first step in terms of establishing a trust factor with the agricultural community in showing them reliable daytime power for 6 months, for a year. That is what will open up tremendous other opportunities in terms of improved metering, drip irrigation, many crop irrigation, crop patterns, so on and so forth. But the first step is to, to establish that trust. So getting daytime reliable power is a great thing. As we have seen in Maharashtra, 4,000 acres, Gram Panchayats have been willingly coming forward to give this, because you're getting 30,000 rupees an acre, escalating at 5% for that land. So that is a significant amount of infusion of money assured for 25 years in the local community. So people are looking for having those projects nearby. They feel that these are their projects dedicated to agriculture. They can see those projects. They can insist on O&M and not have to, think of some project far away from their land. So I think there are definitely very tangible benefits for farmers, and going ahead as this trust-based relationship is developed, that is when one can think of, taking the next steps in terms of group metering, drip irrigation, more such progressive steps for water and other things.
Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Go.
Yeah, Ashwini. Just to support that Ashwini's statements, while we commissioned 100 megawatts, so we decided to look for the option. This is during the last year lockdown period. So we do our internal and we decided to go for the filing of this project for carbon benefit. So happy to know that we already been filed around 56 megawatt under UNFCCC commission. This particular Maharashtra feeders, and we successfully filed. So while doing this, lot of stakeholder consultation was supposed to happen. And to be very honest, on 40 odd sites we selected geographically across Maharashtra, four or five regions. And we done a survey, online survey and face-to-face survey for the farmers. So there was really excitement. And if you see the comments and the feedback from the farmers, the very important feedback is that very common across the state was they were getting a daytime power. Second very important is now the voltage level has been improved, because the last consumer at the LMKV level, at the DTC level, he was suffering from the voltages even though there wasn't power available. Third important was in 4 out of 7 weeks a day, 4 days they are getting nighttime power, 3 days they are getting the daytime power. Because of this, now they are getting for all the days on the daytime powers. The nighttime power was a very, very risky job for the farmers. If you see the many cases in the newspaper also, there was casualties, there was snake biting cases, there was theft cases during the night hours. So that has been really surprising and encouraging to the farmers to spare and utilize that night time for its own. And this will really has a positive side on the health of the farmers. So that's how the farmer has an interest and they are taking participation in this project. Gram Panchayats, they are calling us directly to see our site, come to our site, survey that site, find it feasible and install the solar plants. Second question, you are talking about the energy and water nexus. So I must state that no study has been done for so far, the whatever has been done for the water side. But going ahead, we are doing one project, similar projects with the Israel government on the energy water nexus. On certain areas, in the Maharashtra itself, we are doing that project and we are at the final stage. This was supposed to complete in this March work, but we got an extension for 1 year because of the COVID situation. So we are doing this study on the agriculture feeders, which are already been dedicated and over to the solar. So we are working with the IIT Bhubaneswar. They have a model with the integrated groundwater resource model. And we are trying to see that how the energy water nexus has been to be improved in that area. So we done some interventions on the other side of the meter. We introduced the micro irrigation system, encouraging the farmers to use that micro irrigation system so that the energy required itself can be reduced. At the same time, the crop yield can be also improved. And through this integrated groundwater recharge model, we are trying to build up the recharge system, groundwater recharge system, and improve the table level so that the energy utilized to lift the water should be reduced. So that's how we are trying and see that establish the baseline and trying to improve that the energy water nexus. So definitely it's a good subject area. One has to really take into this consideration also. It's not only about the electricity or solar energy. It has also impact and great impact on the groundwater table also. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Patel. That sounds interesting. So there is a potential to build in other factors so that both water and there could be co-management of water and energy demand in agriculture. Now I said to Achilles, you made an interesting point in your initial remarks. And the reason there was three components in the central scheme was because different schemes work in different contexts. So maybe from Gujarat experience, from the Gujarat solar irrigation policy that you are supporting in sort of that you are engaged in helping. So can you share us how Gujarat policy is stepping up, and when it comes to the three components, component A, B, C, how should states prioritize which scheme is more appropriate for a particular context, and how should states prioritize that? Achilles.
Right, thanks, Ashwini. I think all three are important, and each state needs to calibrate its own policy, and it's based on its own priority. So it's not one against the other. I think all three have to work in conjunction. In terms of what Gujarat has done, we've progressed significantly on both A, B, C. I think on component C essentially came out of Gujarat, the excellent work that IWMI has done on net metered grid connected individual solar pumps. So we have our own policy which predates KUSUM, known as SKY, Surya Shakti Kisan Yojana. We ran this policy, I won't use adjectives, successfully or non-successfully, but we ran this for about 1.5 to 2 years. The target was, so it was about a 700 crore state government proposal. The target was to achieve 175 megawatt across all the districts in Gujarat. As on date, we have about 100 megawatt commission, and about 4,000 farmers have been reached under SKY. Now we have paused SKY, now that KUSUM has come in. You must understand that in SKY, the structure was very similar to KUSUM, but the MNRE portion of that, the 30%, was never given to Gujarat. So the state government had to foot that bill of 30%. Although we had written to the secretary saying that, we request MNRE to give it under their existing solar pump provisions, but that never came. So now that component C, KUSUM and KUSUM guidelines had come, we had to pause our policy and align our policy with component C. In terms of installation under component C of KUSUM, we haven't made any installations as of now. We're trying to still internally adjust our processes, tenders, and so on, and panel list, and so on. So, so what are the results from SKY? I beg your pardon, from SKY. It is a mixed bag, to be honest. In certain areas, we have seen SKY to be pretty quote unquote successful. The measure really is in reducing the kilowatt hours per HP, per installed HP of pump capacity. We've seen it actually go down in certain areas, especially certain water stressed areas. I think one question was related to the water energy nexus. So especially in Maharashtra, etc., we've seen certain positive impact. At the same time, we've also seen energy consumption even go up by, say, double in certain feeders in certain cases. That's very surprising, and to be honest, we ourselves don't fully understand it. What we're doing is going on site and trying to correlate the data from the IoT system which we've implemented with on-ground surveys. But due to COVID, we've not been able to do it. But our initial let's say guesses, if I can call it that, is that there's some amount of gaming happening. Now, where is that gaming happening? It could be due to some so-called farmers who have some farmland, but they're really not farming. So most of this energy is being supplied back to the grid. So this is one of the concerns or lessons learned for us. The other, I think, very important lesson is is farmers getting the first check. I think symbolically and in terms of behavioral change, that's very, very important. What happened in Gujarat is because not all farmers on a net metered basis, bi-monthly net metered basis, they didn't have a net export, which means they had a net import for which they had to pay money. The state government took a decision saying that we don't want to start a scheme where farmers have to pay money. So they deferred the payment and allowed farmers to carry this over on a yearly basis. While that was good for some farmers, it deterred a whole lot of other farmers because they really didn't see the returns. So I think for farmers in terms of behavioral change, seeing money upfront really is extremely important. Second point. Third experience, I think from Kusum sees the importance of community organizing, getting farmers to understand the technology, understand what they're participating is extraordinarily crucial, and I can't highlight it enough. We've seen cases where the empaneled agency, the EPC, has gone to the field, installed the systems, and farmers have actually planted all around the solar panels. So you have 2-meter crops or 1.5-meter crops surrounding the system, and then farmers are saying, you know what's happening. So a lack of capacity building we've observed, and I think we are trying to remedy this, being in Gujarat. But it's all, there's only so much we can do. So I think any policy should have an integrated aspect of community building and capacity building for the intended beneficiaries. Also links to Ashwin's comment on, I think, Maharashtra experience where the local panchayat leaders, the communities coming ahead and saying, use our lands. I think this ownership angle is extremely crucial, which perhaps we could have done a better job. So these are, I think, 3 important lessons in C, component C. In component B, Gujarat has already started it. If you see the vendors have been empaneled and also the application for installations have already happened. I'm reading off my screen here. We have 745 applications received for a total HP capacity of 4,777. So roughly 4,000 odd megawatt of off-grid capacity is coming up. And you may, as I said earlier in my comment, we may be surprised, why do we have such a huge off-grid capacity? Remember that in Gujarat, we have significant pending agricultural connections, and that's very, very critical. So GUNL's strategy is to push a lot of these otherwise grid-connected farmers into off-grid mode. I don't know whether that's good, bad, pros and cons. We can certainly debate it. The benchmark prices have been discovered per HP, and so we are just about rolling this out in terms of reaching out to the farmers. So we have about 745 applications received under component B. In component A, we have a slightly different component A. We call it the small scale and distributed policy. It's up on the Energy and Petrochemical Department website. So those of you who are interested can go through it. Essentially, it's a distributed capacity. It's a distributed solar scheme. We are not coming from the farmer's perspective. We are more so targeting those developers, MSMEs, who want to invest in solar, but they don't have the capacity to compete with the giants in terms of 50 megawatt, 100 megawatt, so on. So this is a fixed tariff scheme. So we have the lowest bid rate discovered in the last 6 months. We add 20 paisa over it, and anybody can come and install it. What is interesting and perhaps not publicly known is the industries department is giving an interest subsidy for this scheme. So a lot of MSMEs, companies registered as MSMEs, are taking this interest subsidy, and therefore these investors are able to make it work in terms of a IRR perspective. So on component A, it's actually gone through the roof for us. We have a huge pipeline of applications. We have about 4.5 gigawatt of application as on date as I speak, with over 750 applications. So just component A and B put together, we are looking at 4.7 plus 4.5 gigawatt. So close to 9 gigawatt of these two. And in component C, that is Sky, not Kusum, but Sky, we have done about 100 megawatts. So that's more limited. So that's where we stand in terms of Gujarat as on date. I'll stop here. Be open to questions later on.
Thanks, Achilles. That's pretty useful. So on a relative, I pick up one point on building the community and building trust of farmers. I'll go to Mr. Malik. You have experience of working in Maharashtra with farmers. So how has been your engagement with the local community or farmers, if any? And is there any issue with land procurement? Has there been cooperation from farmers cooperative, if any? Uh, okay.
For us, land acquisition, I think there was no special experience in terms of whether the farmers, whether they're selling it to the land or leasing the land for a project which is, say, getting connected to a solar feeder project, or say connected to a 50 megawatt project, right? So we have EHV projects. So I don't think there was any difference per se. In terms of when we did land acquisition, I think one benefit with a smaller project is that it's easier to do in terms of doing because land has to be contiguous, right? So doing a big parcel contiguous is much more difficult than doing, say, 40-50 acres. And but the negative side was that given that it's on an 11 kV system, so we have to locate it very, very close to the substation, right? So primarily, given that it was an 11 kV system, we were looking at a radius of maximum 3 kilometers, right? Not more than that, given that the losses will increase. So then it restricts the land that can be taken. Overall, I think there were pros and cons as with respect to how we look at an EHV project, but otherwise we practically did not see any difference, right? So there was no I cannot say there was more enthusiasm from the farmer side to lease a project to us, given that we were doing it on a solar feeder mechanism. I think it works by economics, right? It's more commercial, and the farmer, if he sees the benefit, right, he will lease the land, and that's primarily how it works.
Anyone else want to come in on this point? The interaction with the farmers? Anyone? Mr. Kokate, if you have any experience of interacting with farmer groups and what has been the reaction from the farmer groups?
Yes. So the starting of the project, where actually when you take up any site on the field, it starts with the interaction with the farmers only. Okay. So this is how we get the feedback from the farmers also, and the farmer cooperative groups also. So while we are doing the projects on the Gram Panchayat land, not on any private land and on the DISCOM land only, but the Gram Panchayat land, when getting the land from the revenue department is a big challenge to us. I said that Mr. Malik said that you require to have 15-16 number of NOCs, and you have to follow that process. That itself is a big activity. So to identifying the land and making the feasibility of the land, farmers' feedback is very important on that. Secondly, that shows the what was the need of that particular site in that area. So that feedback you get from the farmer. Second, the ROW issues right of the way. So putting the injection line, that is a power evacuation line, right from the substation, right from the plant to the substation, around 3 to 4 kilometers or 5 kilometers. In some cases, it's a 5-kilometer line. So putting the single pole into the farmer's land and then convince him that, and again the group of farmers convincing them, making some compensation, combining together, tell him then the benefits. This scheme is for you guys, and then you have to really support us, and all these activities are required for each and every project. We cannot run away from this project. So consultation of farmer is very, very important. We also conduct a socio-economic study for the farmers in certain areas on the Maharashtra, particularly on Ahmednagar district. The results were very encouraging. So the kind of feedbacks and all this gets. So very soon we are publishing that report. I'll share with Ashwin, and he can also publish on their website. So the farmer consultation is very important. Without farmers, you cannot put the plant. Even if you put the plant, you cannot run the plant, because you have to run and maintain the plants for 25 years.
So is the current land leasing and land conversion law a roadblock for this project, or?
So far, yes, please.
Sorry. So there is no special dispensation for land for these projects, right? So there is land conversion has to take place. So as in though there are no special benefits for currently, at least in Maharashtra, there are no benefits that are there for these projects. Private land per se.
And Mr. Kokate, audience want to know what has been ESL's experience with getting carbon credits for solar feeder projects. And, how other states can benefit, or are you working with other states on that aspect?
Yes. So, Ashwin, to be very open, as I said, we already filed 56 megawatt and 64 sites for the carbon benefits. So we successfully registered on that. So I see that the particular this project what we are doing in Maharashtra, it is without component C of the Kusum. Still, it is a win-win for everybody. So now I am requesting in other states also, and we are discussing that with the help of component C, the benefits will be maximized. So we are requesting state governments to look at, pass on something to the farmers, pass on something to the actually distribution side to strengthen the network. Then only we can improve that. So that's how we are initiated the dialogue with the other states. We are talking with the MP, we are talking with the Karnataka government, and to the extent Goa, we have already been doing that, and north states also. So with component C, the states are coming forward now, because there is some immediate incentive to the states also, state discoms. And the experience what you said that unlike the large scale project or mega scale projects, the distributed solar generation, it's a special, I would say that it's a special skill set job, first of all, to manage the stakeholders, because it's not only one stakeholder around to the generating the power and selling to the discom. It's not all about that. It is about to managing all the stakeholder, right from your local leaders, right from the revenue department, taking the good land, good clear titled land into your basket, and then leasing out that land, making these agreements, convincing the discom, right from the junior engineer level, from the executive engineer level to chief engineer, and then to the director level. So there are many stakeholders. So but thanks that now the scenario have built up, the more and more capacity has been doing that. Others, just like Maharashtra, other states are coming forward. So I believe that we can do this really energy transition through this program.
Okay, now I come to you with a different question. So as we know, you have been tracking discom finance and discom performance for quite some time in several states, and you co-authored a nice report about discom future, where we're looking at a greater load migration, particularly from business consumers. So in that context, this solar feeder model sort of seeks to hold on the agricultural consumers to the discoms, but with a reduced cost of supply. I mean, as Ashwin pointed out, this sort of brings down the cost of supply by nearly half, from 6 rupee to roughly around 3 rupees. But what are the implications? Is it still viable for discoms to continue serving the agricultural consumers at this rate? And if there's a large scale uptake of solar feeders in the big agricultural states, so what will be the implication for discom finance going forward? I mean, let's say, if we say by 2030, most large agri states switch to some form of solarization of agriculture, what's the implications for discom finance?
Yes, so I think reduction in cost would definitely be something that distribution companies would benefit from. And I think this is just probably one of the important, components of any solution that we have to think of to address the distribution companies' financial challenges. This is not going to be a silver bullet to solve all the issues. But I think with solarization of agriculture, another important aspect is also to try and ensure that there is no baseload capacity addition without a serious assessment by the utilities. Because if the whole idea is to prevent lock-ins in the future and control costs, then along with managing agricultural demand through low-cost options where the price is fixed for a 25-year period and there is reduced uncertainty with respect to power procurement price, which is a huge bonus for the distribution companies. Efforts have to be made that in the phase of uncertain demand, especially with open access and captive consumers and large consumers moving away, there are efforts to really rationalize and look at what future capacity addition needs to be, and whether there is any requirement for a baseload 25-year PPAs going forward. I think that is another major step that needs to be looked at, and also ways to facilitate options for consumers who want competitive supply from options other than the utility. So that would sort of force the utility also to be a little more efficient, because there are other competitive supply options that consumers can choose from through market methods such as open access and captive, where the shifting between consumers will be easy. There will not be any issues with management of wires. The same infrastructure can be used. So those sort of models would also complement the efforts to go towards a better and more viable utility. And obviously managing agricultural demand and fixing the cost for 25 years, ensuring daytime supply would definitely contribute to that.
Thanks, Anne. So we are about 15 minutes to end of the session. So maybe I'll put a common question to all panelists. So, when India started the 2022 target for RE, the 175 gigawatt in 2015, there was a equal focus on decentralized renewable energy. At least out of the 100 gigawatt solar capacity, there was 40 gigawatt for solar rooftop and other things, small scale deployment. But in last 5 years, there has been a greater focus on grid scale expansion of RE. But with this shift in conversation towards solarization of irrigation, which is about 20% of the electricity demand in India, as you rightly pointed out. So do you think there will be a shift in small scale, more locally or consumption, closer to the consumption center kind of RE deployment in Indian states? If so, and with this kind of approach, how do states prioritize, and how this particular solarization of irrigation can contribute to the new RE target, which is 450 gigawatts? So maybe a quick reaction from all panelists. I'll start with Anne, with you. And then.
Sorry, Ashwini, I was looking at the questions. Can you repeat the?
So basically, I'm assuming that with solarization of irrigation coming in, we are seeing a shift towards more decentralized kind of RE deployment, and which has been neglected in last 5 years. As against our 40 gigawatt solar rooftop target, we have achieved barely 10% of that. But irrigation being a potential area for RE use, is it shifting towards more decentralized use, be it feeder level or be it pump level usage? So in that way, can small scale RE contribute to, and how, to the 450 gigawatt target? How big role it will play in that target?
I think it really depends on, potential wise, as Ashwin has already pointed out, it's about 75 to 80 gigawatts of the 450 gigawatt target, which could really potentially come from decentralized efforts for solarization. And therefore the contribution could be significant. But I think it really depends on the focus that states provide, the kind of frameworks that are there, and how accelerated this deployment can become. Because and also the kind of planning that states do. If the approach is pretty much similar to what let's say some states are doing, where there is a centralized project with a much bigger gigawatt scale capacity, and that is being used to provide power for all agricultural consumers, then with it comes the fact that there would be a significant amount of losses that also need to be counted. There could be other governance issues that need to be looked into. So I guess really the centralized versus decentralized approach, solar versus feeder versus pump approach. It has to be seen on a state specific basis based on the state priorities, and having a uniform framework addressing some of those challenges, providing a clear sort of roadmap, understanding the costs and benefits going forward will provide much more clarity to and help decision makers make the choice for the state based on their realities. So I think it depends a lot on that.
Thanks. Ankush, I mean, in addition to that question, with your ground experience, I also ask you what sort of regulatory and policy openings we need at state level to foster this sort of uptake of RE for agriculture, and also the financial opportunities as well.
Yeah, I think one thing that needs to come out clearly is so what generally happens is when people are looking at tariffs from these projects, right? They then tend to look at tariffs from projects from bigger, say 300 megawatt projects that are coming up now and are being bidded at 2 rupees or 2.2 rupees, and then the expectation from the DISCOM end is also to get to those tariffs. I think one major thing that needs to come through is so there is. Currently a subsidy of interstate waiver of charges and losses, right? Now initially it was very, very beneficial for RE deployment, but what has it led to is that there is only solar development, primarily solar, big solar coming up only in Rajasthan, right? Mm-hmm. Because what has happened is that all the transmission charges and losses are waived for renewables. So for the DISCOM, it is at 2 rupees. So say a DISCOM wants to buy power from, say a Madhya Pradesh DISCOM, right? So they want to buy power. Now, any project that comes up in MP would probably be cost, so this is about a bigger project, say at 2 rupees 70 paisa. But when they look at a project from Rajasthan under a CTU, it will be at 2 rupees, right? So they will not like to have projects within their states. Now what this leads to is that most of the projects or most of the procurement is then tending towards bigger projects which have this benefit. But what is not accounted for is that new transmission infrastructure is being created, right, for those projects, which itself is probably costing around more than 1 to 1.5 rupees. Now, when there is this kind of a subsidy, right, and this does not get accounted for, it creates a problem, right? So in terms of regulatory mechanism, I think there needs to be more education or more information in terms of how to compare on a like-to-like basis, on a marginal cost basis. I think that would clearly show that there is a lot of benefits that will come through decentralized renewable power. I think the major benefit per se on renewables was that unlike thermal or hydro projects, right, which are big, from where significant investments have to be done on transmission to get the power from the station to the final consumer, solar can be put up very, very close to the consumer, right? So thereby reducing the transmission cost. So that, I think, is something which needs to be incorporated for people, because I think the DISCOM would also look at it, even though there is a social benefit in terms of moving to renewables, right? But given how precarious the situation of the DISCOM is, it's all about economics, right, for them. So the more commercially viable we can make make solar and then distributed solar, I think the faster it will grow.
Thanks, Ankush. Achilles, any reaction to this question?
To the whole debate of centralized versus centralized. So just from our experience of doing decentralized rooftop installation. So decentralized is a great idea, right? But it needs to be taken with a huge sack of salt. What we've really observed is so we did a random inspection under the rooftop scheme of about 3,000 rooftop solar installation across all districts in Gujarat, and we found that nearly 60% of them were not being maintained. So that's a huge loss. So all this megawatt installed is not resulting in megawatt hours or kilowatt hours generated. So we need to be very, very careful on this. I don't think the incentive mechanisms are appropriately set up from a regulatory policy perspective. to incentivize generation. We are subsidizing capex, but we are not really incentivizing generation. So we really need a good mechanism to do that. This problem doesn't exist in the centralized schemes, the centralized thing. The second is, I think, some rationale before we come up with this 40 gigawatt target. I mean, on what basis has it been even determined? I have no clue. So do we have enough rooftops to accommodate 40 gigawatt is a question, especially in affluent cities. If you put Delhi, Hyderabad, Bombay, etc. together, it may be not more than, I think, 15, 20 gigawatts. So then where is the excess capacity coming from? This is where we had written to MNRE saying, consider, instead of saying 40 gigawatt rooftop target, call it distributed target where you can include Kusum, for instance. And so that will contribute to the 175 gigawatt goal. So I think we need a far more broader thought process in this policy and regulatory space. Another important point when we talk about distributed solar is we need distributed decision making. Often, most of the decisions, even for a small 2 kilowatt, is taken by the secretary of the energy secretary or the managing director of the DISCOM. This is extremely inefficient. So when we talk about distributed solar, we also need distributed decision making process. The governance aspect that Anne, I think, so beautifully put is extremely critical. We can't talk about distributed solar and centralized decision making. So that's a bit of a parity which we need to solve.
Thanks. That's an interesting point. I mean, we need to at least go down to state level and take feedback from the bottom level to plan for decentralized interventions. Mr. Kokate, if you want to respond.
Yeah. So Ashwini, in my opinion, this distributed RE, that is especially distributed solar, is the answer to the categories like subsidized categories like agriculture, which are on the base load. If you see any DISCOM perspective side, average cost of supply is going up and up, and the revenue subsidy is doubled since last 5 years. If you see the numbers, Maharashtra alone is putting 12,000 crores of subsidy on agriculture. So distributed solar at 3 rupees daytime, 6 hours power is the best answer for the agriculture. Special important avenue is also open for the DISCOM. If you see the wisely, that is the energy arbitrage. What we suggest that is not only putting the solar plant, if you coupled with the few megawatt hours of battery storage, so there is an opportunity to store that energy, excess energy, and cater that during the night peak hours to the high-end consumers into nearby urban area. So we done, and we exactly what we have proposed into Goa also, that so putting 1 and 1.5 rupees into the tariff and catering to the high-end consumers during the night peak hours. This will another big game and big avenue for the DISCOM. For example, if I put a 5 megawatt distributed solar, and in the close vicinity of that, if I able to make 1 megawatt hours of battery storage, wherein I have very low marginal cost because plant is already been there, and somehow if I able to meet that, cater that load during the street lights into nearing urban city, again the street light power tariff is around 7 rupees. So if that is how the energy arbitrage can also be played out. So I see that distributed solar and the distributed renewable energy has a big potential to come in out. So that way the centralized versus distributed has to be easily monitored. So from definitely DISCOM perspective and for economic operation, distributed solar will be more beneficial.
Thank you. Ashwini, over to you for last words.
Thanks, Ashwini. Excellent set of questions, and really shows people are very, very interested in, and there are lots of nitty-gritties that we still need to really to overcome and have good incentive structures in place. I think Maharashtra has provided a framework, a starting point. There are lots of lessons for states to learn, as Mr. Kokate and Mr. Malik said. If you want low prices, project sizes need to be of a certain kind. What of preparatory work can be done in terms of accelerating progress in terms of land, the differences between Kusum A and C. We saw a recent parliamentary report on MNRE where the answer was that there is more than 4 or 5 times the demand in Kusum C because there is now a new 30%, as in the 30% subsidy is there, but feeder level solarization is not now allowed. So states have a strong incentive to adopt this approach. There is a strong demand, I think we need to polish the edges in terms of getting a very smooth regulatory structure in place, getting a good policy structure for land in place. And I think there will be a very, very strong uptake for these in all agriculture dominant states. And as we estimated around, in 10 years, one could, optimistically hope that if all agriculture goes this way, you are looking at close to 80 gigawatts with some growth close to 100 gigawatts of solar. So that's a huge and very ambitious thing, and it can be very transformative. And as we keep discussing, instead of focusing on the 5 paisa gain or something, it's important to act fast, because there is a 1 rupee savings to be made today. Maybe the savings would be 1 rupee 5 paise 5 years from now, but you would lose on 5 years of 1 rupee saving. So it's very, very important that states act fast, and this is a very central piece to the DISCOM's financial viability. So more than solar, more than all those factors are important. But I think if we want a healthy renewable energy, a healthy distribution sector which can support 450 gigawatts, it has to be financially stable, and this is the cornerstone of making a healthy financial distribution sector. Thanks.
Thank you, Ashwin. This is a very insightful discussion, and one positive thing I take from here is for last 15 years I've been listening agricultural demand or agricultural electricity subsidy is the big problem for power sector, and it's disturbing reforms. It's a roadblock for everything good that can happen in power sector. But at least from this discussion, we agree that agriculture can be a potential contributor to energy transition. And that's the positive side. I mean, whether model A, B, or C, I mean, each has their comparative advantage, and we have to fine tune that to state context. But it's a positive direction we are heading towards, and collectively we have to figure out what are those regulatory institutional paths we have to take to achieve that. And we are 1 minute above the time, and I thank all the panelists for their time and insightful thoughts and comments on the discussion. So thank you very much for making the time. And as you know, this roundtable is part of a series we are hosting. So the next one is happening on 11th May at same time on innovation, technology, and reforms for viable utilities. So I request you all to join that. And I also want to acknowledge Children's Investment Fund Foundation for supporting us on this initiative. Thanks, SIF colleagues, for supporting us on this. And we end with this. Thank you very much for the discussion, and thanks all the participants for really thought-provoking questions. And we could take some of it, but